This is Brian Zeller. This is my final project PowerPoint. I did it on the Deepwater Horizon um, oil rig vessel that exploded 50 miles off of New Orleans. I figured that this was a really interesting topic to do, and I think it was a huge moment in the history of the world. A lot of people saw how dangerous these chemicals and everything can be to our ecosystem. History on the Deepwater Horizon. On April 20th, 2010, the explosion occurred. 11 men were killed, 17 were injured by the explosion and the fire. The cause of the explosion was later found to be executives from BP were taking cuts and shortcuts to make deadlines that they were not meeting and losing money ultimately. Um, the rig capsized and sank on the morning of April 22nd. So they estimated that between 1,000 and 60,000 barrels per day were dumped into the Gulf of Mexico for 87 days. Hazards involved ranging from physical, psychological, chemical, and biological. Those were all exercised because of the explosion. The most obvious hazardous event was the physical harm that it uh, endured by all the employees on the Deepwater Horizon. Obviously, a lot of people were injured. 11 lost their lives, 17 were injured. So obviously, this is a dangerous job, and BP made it much more dangerous by not checking their equipment regularly and rushing deadlines, causing this explosion to occur and ultimately altering the lives of 17 people, over 17 people. On the hazards, one of the major hazards that occurred was the psychological hazards that all the employees and their families had to deal with a lot during this explosion. I watched a couple interviews with survivors where they said there was many hours where they were unable to talk to their family members and assure them that they were okay, and their family members were hearing about this on the news and calling in to other family members that didn't know anything. So ultimately, that's a lot of emotional trauma for the employees and their families that they're going to have to live with for the rest of their lives. The chemical and biological hazards are probably the furthest reaching hazards out of all of them, because this affected the entire ecosystem in the Gulf of Mexico. The oil spill was found to have killed many marine animals such as whales, dolphins, seals, and sea otters. Many birds were killed because of being covered in thick oil and they were unable to fly, thus causing their death. So this obviously was extremely difficult on the ecosystem, on businesses around the Gulf of Mexico, and all the animals in the water. So kind of similar to what we go through with the Lake O being released lately. It's just very detrimental to the environment. The U.S. government was extremely involved from a local, state, and a federal government stance after the BP oil spill. The first act that the U.S. government did was a search and rescue mission that to go out and get all the employees that were on the Deepwater Horizon when the explosion occurred. They were very involved from the beginning towards the end. They also put in new regulations that we'll talk about later. And they had to be for something that was such a large scale disaster that is occurring in our waters right next to our states and affecting several of our states. So they obviously needed to be rightly involved, and they were. Theories of disaster portion. The theory of disaster for this is the joint effects of nature and society. So obviously, there has to be a portion of nature and the other portion of society. We have to interact with nature in order to create the disaster. This disaster would not have been created by itself without having both of those components. We had to affect nature by drilling in the sea to get oil for ultimately money and to power our vehicles. And without oil, a lot of us wouldn't be able to function because it's such a large scale product that we need. So obviously, this is that joint effect of nature and society, and we ultimately caused this disaster over greed and money, basically. These are some of the causes, consequences, terminology, and taxonomy of the Deepwater Horizon explosion. Um, So BP has had to pay out about $28 billion up to this point in response and cleanup. So that's just some of the taxonomy. that this has affected BP, and that's not even counting all the money they lost, and I'm sure all the money they had to pump into government research and everything they had to do to right their wrongs and pay off the billions of dollars to business owners in the area. One of the big terminologies of this piece was the blowout preventer, which was the actual piece that was supposed to be used for when an explosion or a spill would occur. The blowout preventer is supposed to cut off the pipeline so no oil would spill into a body of water. Obviously, that failed. There's a lot of legislation out there placed in by the Obama campaign that made that more of a big topic for these oil rigs. So obviously, this came at a steep price and a large consequence to our ecosystem. Hazards that were involved. Obviously, the main one was the blowout preventer that obviously BP was not checking regularly. I found a quote from the Associated Press that said, BP did not conduct an effective, comprehensive hazard evaluation of the major risk for the activities of the Deepwater Horizon rig or for the Macondo well. Because of this lapse in them doing the comprehensive research and evaluation and having the plan, this caused um, the large scale oil spill to occur. So this obviously comes at an extreme risk for everyone involved. This was highly dangerous for all the employees, as that was seen. Any oil rig that is doing similar acts as such as BP needs to make sure they're not, because clearly that is dangerous to their business and to their employees. Strategies involved. Obviously, this occurred 8 years ago. Since then, BP has done a lot in learning from their mistakes, and they've made a lot of changes to their model, to their safety planning, to their communication planning, to their communication with the government, to the media, everything. So they've tried to learn from their mistakes. Obviously, only time will tell that they do. In 2016, there was new regulations that were set out by the government. If you would remember when President Trump was running, he asked to take away a lot of those and promised that he would, which he did. A lot of them were based on the blowout preventer and how much testing and everything that needs to be done with the blowout preventer. So obviously that was a key component. A lot of companies have complained about how much they have to do, but you can blame BP, you can blame the oil spill, you can blame the greed and the money. The ecosystem was ruined, and we can't allow that to happen again because it's just extremely detrimental to the environment. So I hope you liked this piece. I really enjoyed learning about it. My interest sparked when I actually watched the movie Deepwater Horizon. It's a great film, so I really enjoyed it, and I feel like I learned a lot. And it was, kind of fun to go back and read about this crazy disaster that occurred and how it could have been prevented, and it never was. Thank you.